Welcome to episode 52 of Game of Thrones Abridged on Alt Swift X. I think we have a bit of a sleepy voice today. We have a bit of a sort of a Duna wrapped blanket encapsulated voice. This is a voice for curling up somewhere on a hammock under a duvet, just a big old sandwich, a big old wrapped burrito of just warmth and comfort. That's what we're trying to communicate, I think. But don't let that fool you. Don't let that make you think that just because we're using a sleepy voice, that doesn't mean we won't be adhering to the text with surgical precision. We are going to be efficient. We are going to have no tangents. We are going to get to the point. We will investigate the whole text and nothing but the text. Not the whole text, because this is Game of Thrones Abridged, of course. So only that parts of the text which are essential. But the point is, we're going to be efficient, and we're going to get to the bottom of what is going on in Sansa 4, A Game of Thrones, the fourth Sansa chapter. Also known as the chapter in which a whole bunch of politicians, a whole bunch of powerful people emotionally manipulate, emotionally blackmail a young vulnerable girl. That's what this chapter's about. This is about how politics in Game of Thrones does not just screw over other politicians, it screws over literal innocent little girls. Game of Thrones is almost like a study in all the different people who get screwed by politics and war. We see how other politicians, like Eddard Stark, I mean, he might not like to call himself a politician, but whether he likes it or not, that's what he is. Politicians like him get screwed over by the Game of Thrones. Kings and ambitious people like Renly and Balon get screwed over by the Game of Thrones. A Feast for Crows, the fourth book, is kind of about how the common people and the realm itself get screwed over by the Game of Thrones. This whole series is about how politics leaves no one innocent. The desire for power leaves no one unbespoiled, right? Everyone gets roped into this terrible game and comes out looking worse than when they came in. And then the second half of the series might be less about the political game and more about, like, the magical game. The ice and the fire, the others, and no doubt it similarly will leave no one untouched, no one not drawn in to its insanity. It should be unsanity, shouldn't it? You should be unsane if you're crazy. But we're not going into any tangents today. Hello, people in the chat. Hello, I see Kata. I see Smashed Avo. I still don't have, like, the best live streaming setup. I'm going to make, like, a better live streaming setup so I can sort of interact with your comments better at the same time that I speak. But, as I said, we're going to get right into the text. The text begins with the line, "They came for Sansa on the third day." And that's pretty, that's ominous. That's ominous out of 10. They came for Sansa. And when they did, we then immediately get a description of Sansa's dress. Dress descriptions for Sansa are what food descriptions are to George R.R. Martin. Whenever she's feeling in a position where she's threatened and she's not sure what to do, her default mode, her holding pattern is to just describe a dress in intense detail. So we get a description of dark grey wool, plainly cut and richly embroidered, blah, 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 blah. And it's emphasized that she chose this simple dress. And I think what this means is that Sansa is trying to give herself a feeling of free choice, right? Because what we're about to learn is that Sansa has been locked in her chambers for the last 3 days while listening to the sounds of fighting, the King's Landing coup nonsense going on outside. And she's had no choice about where she's allowed to be, about what she's allowed to do. So, Sansa has had no choice. But by choosing her dress, that gives her that slightest little feeling of freedom. She may not get to choose where she is or what happens to her, but she is at least able to choose what she wears, and so she relishes that little hint of freedom. So that's depressing. And Jane Poole is also in the room with Sansa, and Jane Poole has been crying about her father, and she's terrified, and she wants to know what happened to her father, Vayon Poole, I think his name is. And then Sansa, the leader, the leader lady, the person who wants to sort of set things right, says, "I'm certain your father is quite well, Jane. At this very moment, Vayon is probably reclining on a hammock with some kind of cocktail in the Summer Isles. He's taken some long service leave. He's just kicking back, getting some vitamin D on the Summer Isles. He's just reading that Dan Brown book. Oh, thank you, Charles Clayton, for your kind donation. He's just leaning back in this hammock. He's like catching up on some reading that he always wanted to do. He's getting a mani-pedi happening, because you get your nails all chipped when you're working as a steward in Winterfell. He's getting all his nails fixed up and his hair done, and he's having one of those facials where like they put the cucumbers on your eyes, and one of those really like relaxing like massagey things where like you put your feet in like the tanks and the little fishies come and like nibble around your toes, and he's getting exfoliated, and he's just getting he's got those bath bombs that like fizz and have all the like lovely little lavender flavors and stuff. It's all very relaxing what Vayon Poole is doing right now. That's what Sansa assures Jane anyway. So Jane is upset, and Sansa is trying to be calm. And Sansa is not very sympathetic of Jane, actually. Jane's kind of losing her mind, getting cooped up in here for 3 days. And Sansa's like, oh, she won't stop crying. What a child. How immature. Which is quite cold, isn't it? Jane's understandably upset about all the tumult happening around her, and Sansa's like, oh, why can't she be more of a lady? I think on the one hand you could say that's cold, but on the other hand you could say that, well, Sansa's just trying to be brave herself. Just like Ned tells Bran about bravery. She's afraid, but she's trying not to be. And she's got this idea of how a proper lady should behave. But yes, poor Jane indeed, Mr. Smashed Avo, because as we'll get into, I think, this is the beginning of things getting very bad for Jane Poole. One of the most tragic little side stories in Game of Thrones is the fate of Jane Poole, but I think we'll get into that. So Sansa then describes how the first day went for her. So in the first day, when she was first locked into her chambers, and she heard the killing begin. And she talks about how, she's pretty familiar with sounds of swords and stuff. She's familiar with people practicing out in the yard, like practice fights. But what she hears outside on the first day, it's not a practice fight. These aren't wooden swords. These aren't unsharpened swords. These are real steel blokes trying to kill each other. And people trying to kill each other sound different to when it's just your brothers having a spar in the yard. Because people are getting hacked up, mate. People are screaming. People are getting wounded. Sansa notes that in the songs, the knights never screamed or begged for mercy. But they are now. So again, we're reminded of the distinction between Sansa's like naive notion of what it means to be a lady and what the songs say about heroism and violence and all of those things, compared to the harsh realities of when people take out steel and start hacking people up, there isn't much that's pretty about any of it. So Sansa wept too on the first day, like Jane. And she was weeping and scared, and she was begging to be let out and to be able to talk to her father and to be able to talk to Queen Cersei. But Sansa does not get let out of her room. And then one day, Jane Poole is thrust inside her room, and Jane Poole is totally freaked out because, unlike Sansa, Jane had actually seen some of the violence going down. They're killing everyone, she had shrieked. She went on, and Jane described how Jane had been sitting in her room when, knock knock, Sandor Clegane beat down her door with a warhammer and dragged her out. Can you imagine anything more terrifying than the Hound beating down your door with a warhammer in the middle of the night? You know that bit in The Shining where what's his name like cuts down the door with the axe, and then it's like, here's Sandor. That's what it'd be like. It'd be like The Shining. You're trapped in this mansion, in this castle, with the fucking Hound chasing after you with the warhammer, gibbering about chicken. That would be bloody horrifying, mate. And that's what Jane Poole has had to endure. Not only being pulled out by Sandor, but by witnessing the murder of all these people around her and fearing for the death of her father. So, Jane's had a rough time. And so they comforted each other on that first day. They went to sleep in each other's arms. They are close friends, Jane and Sansa. And then we describe the second day. And on the second day, they observed that the castle's locked down, the portcullis is down, the drawbridge is up, and there are Lannister men patrolling. So this happens at around the same time the second day. But the first day, I suppose, would happen at about the same time as Arya's chapter when she's escaping the Red Keep. The chapters in Game of Thrones are not strictly chronological. Sometimes there's overlap and all sorts of things going on. Interestingly, I believe the early Daenerys chapters in this book are actually like 6 months or so before the rest of the book, because a lot of time passes in the Daenerys chapters in this book, like months and months, whereas most of the other POVs only advance by, days and weeks. So there are some timey-wimey. George Martin plays it fast and loose with the calendar. I have seen some dedicated fans have put together these massive spreadsheets that calculate what the exact times of all of the dates and all of the happenings throughout the Game of Thrones series based on things like the moon cycles that are mentioned and the ages and the dates between the birthdays and all these things. And it's a very heroic endeavor trying to work this stuff out, but it quite quickly emerges that the simple truth is that George Martin doesn't pay that much attention to the timelines. I mean, it's not like in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien had and Bilbo stubbed his toe once 15 years ago, and that was on a Tuesday. And on this fictional calendar that I invented out of whole cloth, it's actually, that happened in the 14th lunar phase of the butterbeer cycle, which is just after the festival of the fig leaf or something. Tolkien has this very detailed, very well thought out chronology and calendar and all of this nonsense. George R. R. Martin does not. So it does not bear examination to try and work that stuff out, though I don't think the story suffers for it. I don't think the story suffers for not knowing whether Daenerys's day at the Mountains of the Moon happened before or after who cares. Anyway, so we get another food description, just in case you feel like we might go a chapter without a food description. We get a description of hard cheese, we get a description of fresh baked bread, all the classics are here, guys. There's milk, there's roast chicken, there's greens. You would not believe the food description that we're getting here. We're gonna skip it. And then we get some clothes brought in, and there was some servants bringing in some clothing of Jane's and Sansa's. And again, the girls are desperate to say what's going on out there? Are our fathers okay? What's going on? Can I speak to the Queen? What's up? But they refuse to talk to her. In fact, they they flee from them as if Sansa had the Grey Plague, which I think might be the first mention of grayscale in the entire series. And yeah, so they're refusing to let them leave the room. No one's letting Sansa or Jane leave the room for like 2-3 days. And of course, it comes down to Ulswift to ask the really important questions here. The question is, where are they pooping? Where are they pooping? They're locked in their room for 3 days. They're not allowed out. I mean, they have got like chamber pots and stuff, but like, well, no, I guess they must be pretty regularly emptied, mustn't they? Yeah, well, all right, I guess. But I mean, you'd want the servant to come like quite soon after you're done, right? You'd want them to like get right there, just to cycle it out, because otherwise you'll be trapped in your room. The window, yeah, maybe they can just sort of chuck it out the window. They always show on all of the medieval TV shows. They're always just chucking buckets of slop out the window onto the street, right? They defenestrate their shit. It's the defenestration approach to what's that word? It's the defenestration ablution technique. The DA. Anyway, so all right, great detective work, guys. Good work in the comments. The window. I should have thought of that. All right, so then they're talking about how Sansa's like, oh, the Queen's gonna want to talk to me. The Queen's my mate. The Queen's my friend. Cersei's such a lovely lady, and she's gonna let me marry her lovely son, Prince Joffrey. I can rely on them from everything going well. And on the second day they hear a bell ringing. And the bell fills Sansa with a sense of dread. This omen is an ominous, this is a bad sign, is what the bells are. Because, of course, every sign in Game of Thrones is a bad one. Let's be honest, all of the signs and portents are bad ones. It's always some kind of doom of Valyria that's coming, or it's some kind of a hint of the future Red Wedding, or it's always a white raven that heralds the coming of the winter, and with the White Walkers, the red comet is maybe a bit ambiguous, but I think, it's blood red, it's fiery. There's definitely some negativity associated with that. Signs are bad in Game of Thrones. News is bad news. Dark wings, dark words. The only good news in Game of Thrones is no news. And if you get no news, that probably just means that the bad news is gathering its energy to hit you harder later on. Westeros is a bad place. And so Sansa is disturbed by the bells, and they decide that what the bells mean is that the king is dead. Robert Baratheon has popped his clogs. He has been killed by the boar. And Sansa has no idea what's going on. She has no idea about all the stuff that's happening with, like, Ned trying to assume the regency. She's just like, oh, did someone come and murder King Robert? Like, was someone attacking Robert? Is that what the fighting was? She doesn't realize that we've got, like, a Lannister versus Stark situation going on here. And she's afraid for her father. And she's dreaming that night. She's dreaming of Joffrey on the throne. And of course, Joffrey just has been sitting on the throne, so dreams seem to be accurate here once more. And she thinks about Joffrey, and Joffrey has a crown on his head, and she imagines herself sitting beside King Joffrey. And all of these important people, everyone Sansa has ever known, comes before her to bend the knee towards Sansa and say their courtesies. Which is really, really similar to Cersei's dream that she describes at the start of her first chapter, Cersei 1, A Feast for Crows. They both dream of being by the throne, Cersei on the throne, and imagining specifically important people coming and kneeling before them. There are a lot of similarities, actually, between young Cersei and Sansa, because both of them hoped to marry a prince. Cersei hoped to marry Rhaegar, Sansa hoped to marry Joffrey, and they both felt that they were in love with this man who they didn't really understand at all. Cersei never really knew what Rhaegar was about. She didn't have the slightest clue about all of his crazy, prophecy obsessions, and all of his idiosyncrasies. And Sansa doesn't know about the full extent of Joffrey's cruelty. And yet they both convince themselves that they want to be their queens. They both like the idea of power. Cersei more than Sansa. But Sansa does betray here with all of the talk of kneeling. She too does like the idea of being knelt to. She does want power and status. But of course Sansa and Cersei diverge in their lifetimes. They have very different experiences. Sansa, I think, suffers more, I would say. And will become a very different kind of leader when all's said and done. Hopefully. So she dreams about Joffrey, and the next morning Boros Blunt comes to pick her up. And Boros Blunt is an ugly man. He's got baggy jowls, and he's got a broad chest and short legs, and his hair is grey and brittle. And Sansa says to the ugly man, "Oh, you look so handsome this morning, Sir Boros. You look splendid this morning, Lord Boros." And she tells herself internally that a lady remembers her courtesies, and she is determined to be a lady. So being a lady pretty clearly means lying. Sometimes. The whole idea of being ladylike and being polite means telling outright lies. And this chapter in particular is full of lies, and this whole veneer of pretending to be courteous and pretending to be polite and doing the noble thing, which often means lying, and hiding the truth beneath the surface. And so Boros Blunt comes out and he brings Sansa to the Queen. And we also have it mentioned that Sansa was put in her room in the first place a few days ago when Aris Oakheart escorted her to the chambers, and Sansa was told that it was to keep her safe, that she was to be locked inside her room. And then they enter the council chambers, and Queen Cersei is there, and the table is littered with papers and candles and blocks of sealing wax. So Queen Cersei has been busy lately. And Sansa also describes the appearance of the room. She's always very interested in the decor and the feng shui. She's always describing the dresses. She's always describing how handsome people are. She's always describing the kinds of decorations that are in the room. And the small council room does have some interesting decorations. It has a carved wooden screen, and it has twin sphinxes, stone sphinxes, I believe, sitting either side of the door, which is pretty interesting symbolism. What does a sphinx represent? We have Alaras, the Sphinx, in Old Town, in Feast, who is a very mysterious character in her own right. Is there any way that she connects to these sphinxes in the small council room? Probably not, but might there be some interesting symbolism to the sphinx? The riddle in the council room? Maybe. And Sansa comes to the small council room, and also in the council room with Cersei is Peter Baelish and Pycelle and Varys, who is smelling flowery, and all of them are clad in black, in mourning clothes, which again is a dark omen. Oh, Hairless Oyster's going away. Come back soon, Hairless Oyster. And there is the Queen, and she's wearing a high-collared black silk gown, and there's a bodice, and there's a bosom, and there are red rubies sewn into the dress in the shape of teardrops, as if the Queen were weeping blood. So that's ominous. That sounds like the Bolton symbology with the flayed man. I'm pretty sure the Ramsay or Roose wear some ruby-studded, blood-bleeding outfits at some point, which is not the most pleasant imagery. But Cersei's wearing this bloody dress, and she gives Sansa the sweetest and saddest smile she has ever seen. So what we're about to see in this chapter is Cersei really turning it on for Sansa, really like playing the role of like, oh, I'm so sweet and gentle and sympathetic, and making all these promises of how nice Cersei's gonna be to Sansa and how much Cersei loves Sansa, but it's basically all lies from start to finish. So let's see how many lies we can count in this chapter. And so Cersei's like, oh, I do hope you're being looked after. Matters have been very unsettled lately. And very unsettled is about as much of an understatement as you could make about what's been happening in King's Landing recently. And Sansa's like, oh, don't worry, everyone has been very sweet and pleasant, Your Grace. Thank you ever so much for asking, which is another lie, this time from Sansa. So they're trying to assure each other that everything's completely okay. And then Cersei realizes that, oh wait, Jane Poole was in the room with you? Who the hell's Jane Poole, the steward's girl? What was she doing in there with Sansa? What kinds of lies, what sorts of tales was Jane filling Sansa's head with? Next time, before you chuck Jane in with Sansa, ask me first. So Cersei's trying to get everyone to respect her authority. And they're like, oh well, we'll get rid of Jane Poole. We don't want Jane Poole to be a problem or an obstacle here. And Sansa's like, oh, but Jane is going to be okay, right? Jane's father Vayon, he's going to be okay, wouldn't he? And Cersei doesn't directly answer that question. Cersei doesn't want to say what's going on with Vayon. And so Peter just says, hey, I can solve this problem. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, is like, hey, I'll take Jane and I'll make sure she's looked after. And so Cersei agrees. She's like, all right, Littlefinger will take Jane to her father, and everything's going to be okay with Jane. And Sansa, you don't need to worry about Jane anymore. She's just going to disappear. And that's really not very good. What we learn later about the fate of Jane Poole is that Littlefinger comes to her and says, oh, Jane, I'll take you to your father. Your father wants to see you. Everything's going to be okay. So sorry about all the violence that you've witnessed, all the bloodshed, but everything's going to be okay. You just follow me. I'll take you to my father, to your father. But her father's dead. And what Littlefinger actually does, we're a bit hazy on the details, but Littlefinger apparently took Jane to one of his brothels. And I'm not sure how old Jane is, but, not very. And she, I think, is forced by Littlefinger to work in the brothel as a prostitute, or at least has some quote-unquote training or something. I don't recall the exact wording. But being in Littlefinger's care as a young girl is not something that you want to be. And after all that horribleness that we don't really know the details of, after that, Jane becomes fake Arya. So you know how there's that whole thing in the books about how the Boltons want to marry Ramsay to Arya Stark, but they don't have Arya Stark, so they pretend to have Arya Stark. Cersei sends over a fake Arya to be the stand-in for Ramsay to marry, and thereby to bolster the Boltons' political hold over the north. That fake Arya is Jane Poole, because Littlefinger's like, yo, you need some northern girl who can semi-convincingly play the part of Arya Stark. I've got this Jane girl who I've been keeping in my brothel for the last year or so. How about you just take her? No charge. Just like to be helpful. That's me, Littlefinger, can do. And so Jane Poole gets tricked up as Arya Stark and gets forced to marry Ramsay Bolton, who is probably the last person in the world who you want to get married to. So Jane basically just suffers in every conceivable way, and it's sort of an additional cruelty that we never really get to hear her story in full. We only sort of really piece together what happened to her in the sort of the margins of the story. And it just gets worse and worse for Jane Poole, because she ends up losing part of her nose as well from frostbite after Winterfell, and all sorts of horribleness happens to Jane Poole. I think it's worth an Alt Shift X video at some point, probably. But feel sorry for Jane. Anyway, so they're in the council room, and Sansa is there, and Cersei, and Littlefinger, and Varys, and Pycelle are there. And Sansa is confused But Sansa is determined to be a lady. She's determined to be as gentle as the queen and as strong as her mother. But she's scared and she's a bit upset. And Sansa's like, "Oh, you are going to look after Jane, aren't you? Jane's going to be okay, isn't she?" And she's not. But Cersei's like, "Oh no, well, we can't have anyone upsetting you. Okay, Sansa, we're just looking after your well-being. Now let's sit down and let's have a talk." And so Sansa sits down and she sees Littlefinger staring at her, and there's something about Littlefinger's gaze that makes Sansa feel as though she has no clothes on. So yeah, Littlefinger's perving on Sansa just to make matters even more uncomfortable. And so Sansa's like, "Oh, Sansa, sweet Sansa, you're so beautiful. Me and Joffrey love you so much." This is something that Cersei does more in the books than in the show, I think. In the show, we see more of like sassy Cersei and like humanized, suffering, pathos Cersei, all the different flavors of Cersei, but we don't see as much of like sweet, charismatic, seductive, gentle Cersei. Cersei wants a big old bowl of strawberry ice cream. Cersei comes across as more this like motherly, feminine thing. She does that sort of act more often in the books than she does in the show, and here she really turns it on. And she's like, "Oh, Sansa, I think of you as my own daughter, and I know that you love Joffrey, and oh, we just love you so much. We appreciate you we love you so much." And then, and Sansa is totally, like, taking this in. Like, Sansa totally takes the bait, and she's like, "Oh, you do love me?" And all of her Disney princess dreams are coming true, and she's like, "Oh, Joffrey loves me, the Queen Cersei loves me, everything's gonna be okay." And of course, based on the treatment of Sansa later in the series, all of this love that Cersei supposedly bears for Sansa are lies. Cruel lies. And then they break the news that, "Oh, by the way, Sansa, your father is a traitor. Your father's a traitor, he's a bad man, you can't love him anymore." And Sansa's like, "What the shit?" And then Pycella's like, "Nope, the very moment that King Robert died, the very moment that he died, Lord Eddard decided to install himself as regent, and he decided to steal Prince Joffrey's throne and give it to Stannis." And so Cersei presents the piece of paper, the letter that Ned was trying to have delivered to Stannis, inviting him to take the throne, because of course that was Ned's plan, to invite Stannis, the rightful heir, given that Joffrey's an incest baby, inviting Stannis to come take the throne. And so the way Pycelle describes it, it does sound kind of bad. It does sound as though Ned was trying to steal the throne from Joffrey and give it to Stannis, because they don't have that critical piece of information that Joffrey's a little incest monster. Without knowing that bit of information, it sure does look as though Ned was trying to pull off a coup. Because he did do all that skullduggery with like trying to bribe the gold cloaks and all that. So Ned does look kind of guilty from the outside if you don't know the truth about the seed and the strong and all of that. And Sansa was like, "No, Ned would never do that. He's such a good man. He's my father. He's a good bloke." And yeah, not all incest babies are bad. Well said, Asia N. # not all incest babies. And the Queen is like, "Well, Robert thought that Ned was his friend, but I guess not. I guess your father was just a cunt all along." And Cersei speaks very sympathetically about Robert, as though she loved Robert, saying things like, "Oh, this betrayal by his friend would have broken Robert's heart. The gods are so kind that he did not live to see it." So Cersei pretends to give a shit about her ex-husband and pretend that she didn't bloody murder him in the first place. And then Cersei really drops the bomb. She really puts, she's put out the carrot, now she puts down the stick. And Cersei says, "By the way, because of all this shit with your father being a traitor, that might mean that you don't get to marry Joffrey." And that really hits Sansa where it hurts, because Sansa's biggest hope, biggest dream, the thing that she's obsessed with in her teenage way, is marrying Joffrey. That's what Sansa desperately wants to do, because he's so pretty, and he's so blonde, and he's so charismatic, and he stands up on the stage, and he's a bit mopey sometimes, and sometimes he does those untoward things, but he's such a good boy, because he's so pretty, and he's the prince, and I'm going to marry him, and he's going to be mine, and I'm going to be queen, and little bird. That's what Sansa does. But then Cersei's like, yo, you don't get that if you don't play nice. And so Sansa's like, oh, but I do love Joffrey, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it was meant to be. I dreamed of marrying. So she goes on and on and on. But then Cersei's like, look, and Cersei's voice is so kind and so sweet. And Cersei says, look, all right, well, look, I do know that you love Joffrey, and I do know that you love me, because you came and told me about your father's plan to send you and Arya away. And that's a bit of a truth bomb. So we find out that part of why Cersei was able to so quickly act against Ned's attempt to take over the political situation in the city was that Sansa told Cersei about his plans to send Sansa and Arya away, which is a giveaway that Ned's trying to make some kind of political move. Sansa, in a way, betrayed her father. And a lot of people give Sansa a lot of shit for this, for coming to Cersei and telling tales. But the thing is, Sansa didn't know. Sansa didn't understand that what she was doing might put her family in serious danger. So I don't think it's really fair to blame Sansa for this. But it certainly was it's a pretty big deal that Sansa came and told Cersei, gave her the warning she needed in order to beat Ned. And Sansa basically did it, arguably out of her self-interest, because she was just so desperate to marry Joffrey, because her plan here, we learn that her plan, Sansa sneaked off, and she wanted to convince the Queen to order Ned to let Sansa stay in King's Landing and marry Joffrey. So she's all acting out of the love for a precious Bieber Joffrey, but it all caused everything to turn to shit. And so we learn about that plan, and we learn that Sansa poured her heart out to Cersei and told Cersei all about what she knew of Ned's plan, and that was when she got locked into her room for 3 days. And Sansa keeps going oh, please, you have to let me marry Joffrey, I'll be such a good wife. And then Cersei's like, oh, well, counselors, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And of course, Pycelle and Varys and Littlefinger are all in line with Cersei and just sort of saying what they've sort of agreed to say, I think. And Pycelle talks about how, Sansa is a child born of traitor's seed, and that means that betrayal will come naturally to her. So she's got the taint of the traitor in her blood. It's like bastardy. They say some pretty gnarly things about bastards, being like, ooh, if you're base-born, that means you're just inherently a cunt. That just means that there's some bad shit in your blood, and you're just a bad person. They say that about, Ramsay, and about some other folks. The bigotry against bastards is pretty intense. And apparently they have similar ideas about the children born of traitor's seed. They've got a funny relationship with genetics in Game of Thrones, don't they? Apparently treachery is something that is genetic, but black hair and blonde hair, apparently not something that's genetic in the eyes of the Lannister regime. Funny how genetics does that. And so then Varys talks about how, oh, well, blood runs truer than oaths. So Varys is, supporting the notion that Sansa is inherently traitorous by virtue, or by lack of virtue, of her father's treachery. Although it's an interesting line to come from Varys, isn't it? Blood runs truer than oaths. Wasn't it Illyrio Mopatis who said that some promises are written in ink and some are written in blood? Illyrio says something like that in reference to the Golden Company and how they broke their contract with Myr in order to fight for Aegon instead. Is it possible that Varys's line about blood and oaths could relate somehow to his Blackfire conspiracy, the possibility, the probability, the certainty that Varys is secretly working to crown Aegon Targaryen, who might actually secretly be Aegon Blackfyre? Could there be blood running true in Varys's connection to Aegon Blackfyre? Maybe. We might have to wait a book or two more to find out. But anything that Varys says, you've always got to examine for possible double meanings. And then Baelish says, well, look, I think that Sansa's blood, it reminds me more of Catelyn than of Eddard. I mean, look at her. She is the very image of Catelyn at the same age. And of course, Catelyn at Sansa's age was someone who young Peter, was desperately in love with, which just adds more and more layers of creepiness onto Peter's earlier perving on Sansa. And the Queen looks at Sansa, troubled, and Sansa can see kindness in her eyes. So Sansa, as a child, she has not yet developed her bullshit detection system. Sansa is not very able to recognize that Cersei's playing her like a bloody fiddle. Sansa's not able to recognize the insincerity in everything that Cersei says and does. Cersei's totally putting on an act of giving a shit about Sansa right now. But Sansa has not yet developed the skills to identify that. She soon will. Sansa's next 3 books is basically like a crash course, intensive summer course on how to identify when people are lying at you and fucking with you. Spoiler, it's probably all the time. Because for the next 3 books, she is surrounded by people constantly lying to her, constantly screwing with her in King's Landing, in the Eyrie, everywhere. People are constantly screwing with her, and she gets better and better at identifying it. But right now, she's totally unblooded. She's totally unblooded in many senses of the word. She's totally naive, and she hasn't yet recognized that Cersei is completely playing her. So we have Cersei talk about how, but then again, your sister Arya set her direwolf on my son. Which again, from Cersei's perspective, that whole incident with Micah and the direwolf did look pretty bad. There were wolves attacking her son, the prince. That is suboptimal by most accounts. But Sansa's like, I'm not like Arya. Arya's bad. Arya has the traitor blood. She's the bad one. I'm the good one. So Sansa is very quick to throw Arya under the bus. In this regard, Sansa's the good one, Arya's the bad one. Sansa views Arya as like her evil version of herself. It's like Nega Scott. Arya is the bad version of Sansa, the opposite. Hopefully later on in the series they'll start to converge a bit more and recognize the good in each other, but there's not a lot of that happening in the first few books. And so Cersei's like, all right, here's the thing. She's hit Sansa with the carrot, she's hit Sansa with the stick, and now she's going to show her the path that she wants Sansa to walk, like a good trained donkey. Cersei says that, alright, here's the thing. We'll treat you alright, and we will, the darkest timeline, Sansa. So if Sansa puts on like a little moustache and a little Abed, texter goatee, that's what Arya is in Sansa's mind, the darkest timeline Sansa. And anyway, so Cersei's like, all right, here's the thing. We might give you a chance at marrying my son and being part of the fold and all of your dreams coming true. You might get that if we can make sure that the rest of your family, the Starks, remain loyal in this difficult political time. And so Sansa's like, oh, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you need. And Cersei's like, oh, can you write and read, and can you write some letters for us? And Sansa's like, yep, I'm real good at reading and writing. She mentions that her reading and writing is better than any of her brothers, but she's useless at sums. So she can, her reading and writing is 8 out of 8, but her arithmetic is not so great. And so Cersei's like, all right, you got to write to your mother Catelyn, you've got to write to your brother Robb, and you've got to tell them about your father's treason. You got to say that Ned Stark's a bad bloke, but that as long as you just remain loyal to the throne, everything's going to be okay. So Cersei's goal here is to prevent war. Cersei's goal is to prevent Robb Stark marching south with his bannermen and attacking the Lannisters. And they also want to prevent the Tullys and the Arryns, Lady Lysa and Hoster Tully from starting war. Cersei's trying to keep everything under wraps. Cersei's basically being not an idiot politically in this book. You got to remember that, like, in A Feast for Crows, in the fourth book, Cersei is, like, pretty much every decision she makes is a terrible one in A Feast for Crows. She's a terrible politician, but you got to remember that there definitely have been times in these earlier books where Cersei's fairly wily. Cersei's pretty on point. As we'll talk about in an upcoming video, Cersei is everything starts to fall apart in Feast for her because she's so stressed about Maggie the Frog, she's so stressed about the deaths of her children, like everything is getting crazy in Feast, and that's kind of part of what leads Cersei to make terrible decisions. In some of the earlier books, she's actually a half-decent political player, and she's identified as such by, like, Tyrion and stuff. Like, Tyrion talks about how Cersei is actually not half bad as a schemer herself, but things definitely go downhill from there. So anyway, so Cersei's goal is to try to get Sansa to write a letter to her family saying, don't start a war, just be cool, forget about Ned, he was a bad dude. And they figure that, hearing it from Sansa will make it more convincing. And the Queen's like, look, we'll tell you what to write, just sign at the end, and it'll all be okay, as long as your family keeps the king's peace. And so Cersei's like, all right, you got to tell them that we're looking after you really well. You got to tell them that you're totally fine and comfy. Of course, Sansa is being used as a hostage right now, like by using. I mean, it's like those videos from, like, the hostages of terrorists or whatever, where, like, they get the hostage to read out the letter saying, "Oh yes, I'm having a great time in this cave in the desert, and the AK-47s pointed at my head are just a fun game, and I'm not in any danger, and please send the ransom money, and everything will be completely okay." Right? So Sansa's a hostage here. She's got people pointing guns at her heads, and she's being made to read the hostage note. Except Sansa, because she's a child, doesn't even realize that the gun is being pointed at her head. She doesn't even see the sword of Damocles because she doesn't understand the danger that she's in at this point. She doesn't even know that her father's in a dungeon right now. And so Cersei's like, all right, you do this for us, you do this one solid for us, and you know what? We might even let you marry the king. We might let you marry King Joffrey. So Cersei's like, shit, that's all I need to hear. Well, she does ask about her father. She does ask about Ned, and Cersei's like, don't worry, Ned hasn't been harmed. He probably has been a bit. Someone probably beat him up a bit, let's be honest. Cersei would have enjoyed that. And Sansa thinks about Joffrey and how Joffrey is the king now and how Joffrey is a gallant prince. And she actually has, like, she thinks, and she has, like, a bit of a plan. Sansa ain't so dumb. Like here's the thing. Like, Sansa, and I think also to some extent Cersei in certain situations, like, people often criticize them for making bad decisions, and they do make bad decisions, but so much of it is just about not being given information. As women in Westeros, people don't tell them what's going on. Ned Stark gets all the information. Robert Baratheon, well, not always all of it, but their ability to make good decisions is compromised by their lack of access to accurate information about what's going on. Sansa has no idea about the bastardy of the Lannister children. Sansa has no idea about just the basics of what's been happening these last few days with the Starks against the Lannisters. So given the really limited information that she has, it's somewhat admirable that she does sort of think about, all right, what is a play that I can make in order to help out my father? So Sansa thinks about how, like, all right, so Ned will be punished for this treason that he supposedly did that I just found out about. Maybe he'll be sent back to Winterfell, or maybe he'll be exiled to the Free Cities across in Essos. But you know what? Like, I'll marry the prince, I'll marry Joffrey, and then I'll persuade King Joffrey to allow Ned to come back and to give him a pardon. So even though Sansa, she doesn't have the right information, but she does start to think about, like, all right, what are the likely political outcomes here? What can I do to try and protect my family? Like, Sansa does try to make some plays, and she is kind of smart about how she does this. So, you got to give her some credit about her handling of this situation. Anyway, so Cersei's like, but Sansa rightly identifies that, but if anything goes wrong, if Catelyn or Robb, if they start a war, if anything bad happens, then everything will turn to shit. And that is the truest thing that Sansa has ever thought. And then Sansa's like, okay, I'll write the letters. And then Cersei gives a smile as warm as the sunrise. And she leans close and kisses Sansa on the cheek. Cersei's always giving physical affection as a reward, as a little Pavlovian tail wag to say, good job, reinforce, good behavior. She's training Cersei like a mule or a dog, and she kisses Sansa for saying the right thing. And she's like, good job, all right. So you'll write letters to Catelyn and to Robb and to Lysa and to Hoster, and everything's gonna be okay. So Sansa writes down all the words that the Queen tells her to write to all of these people, seals it with Ned Stark's seal. Varys had Neddard's seal, which is interesting. I guess Varys was rifling through Ned's things after Ned was imprisoned. It is. I mean, the presence of Varys and Pycelle and Littlefinger is interesting here because each of those people, or at least Varys and Littlefinger, have their whole own other complex motivations going on, of course, right now. But they pretty much just stay complicit and they toe the line with whatever Cersei wants them to do. Because that seems to be most of what Littlefinger and Varys do. They need to pretend to be totally loyal to Cersei's regime, and I don't think anyone believes that they are totally loyal to Cersei's regime. But they pretend to be as a way of staying ingratiated into the system and keeping their power and being able to continue their secret plots secretly. Because, of course, what's happening now is actually arguably totally against Littlefinger's interests, right? Because Littlefinger wants to start war and chaos as a way of advancing himself. That's why he did the thing with the dagger, to set the Starks and the Lannisters against each other. But what's happening now is directly against Littlefinger's interests, because these letters are about preventing war from escalating and about keeping the peace, and yet Littlefinger complies and cooperates with this effort to keep the peace. So Littlefinger and Varys are sometimes forced to work against their own interests in order to maintain their situations of power. It is a delicate balance, a complicated juggle that both Varys and Littlefinger have to play in order to maintain their positions of power and maintain their schemes. So after Sansa writes all of the letters, she goes back to her chamber, and Jane Poole is gone, and all of her things are gone, and she's been sent off to a really unpleasant arc. And Sansa sits down and she immediately immerses herself in some of her favorite books, the stories about the heroes, the knights, and the lovers that she loves reading about. Florian and Jonquil, Lady Shella and the Rainbow Knight, of valiant Prince Aemon and his doomed love for his brother's queen. So these are the stories, the tales, the songs that Sansa is obsessed with. She's still trying to believe in the idea of, like, ladies being courteous and knights being heroic and princes being gallant and everything being okay. So the illusion is not yet broken for Sansa. Sansa has not yet realized that everything in King's Landing is a lie, that people are horrible, and that she needs to really keep her wits about her in order to survive. Sansa still wants to believe that the world is good, and she is yet to have her illusions shattered painfully, as will soon happen. And the last line of the chapter says that Sansa realizes just when she was going to sleep that Sansa forgot to ask about what happened to Arya. Wow, great job, Sansa. Because, of course, Arya, at the same time that this was going down, was going through her own exciting escape from the Red Keep, with going down into the basements and Syria Farrell's apparent death and all of that stuff. Sansa didn't even think to ask about what happened to Arya. She mentioned Arya, but she didn't ask what happened to Arya. So that is another example, I think, of Sansa being quite cold and unsympathetic and not thinking about the needs of others. It's pretty dispassionate for Sansa to not ask about what happened to Arya. But at least she remembered that she forgot to ask. It's like Neville's Remembrall. Remember Neville's Remembrall? It reminds him that he forgot, but he can never remember what it is that he forgot. Well, at least Sansa remembered that she forgot. So 10 points to Gryffindor there. Alright, I think that brings this chapter to a close. Yes, indeed, Smashed Avo, Sansa has done fucked up. That's the end of the chapter. I have have a couple of questions. We're going to do a Q&A, but the Q&A, I'm not going to be A-ing the Qs. You're going to be A-ing the Qs. I got 2 questions. First question, do you guys know of any shows online that are like live streamed or like podcasts or like YouTube that is kind of like this? Is there like stuff that's like Swift except like better maybe, or just like whatever? Like, are there like book clubby sort of abridged-y shows that are a bit like this but like maybe a bit different? Because I want to like get some ideas as to like what else can be done with this show, what kind of directions, what kind of improvements. Is there anything that's like this? Not necessarily an abridged series, but more like the idea of like summarizing a show and like chatting about it, like a live book show type thing. I'm getting the vibe from y'all that no such thing exists. Pro wrestling, Caleb suggests. Yeah, alright. So it sounds as though there aren't many things a whole lot like this. There are no shows like Swift. There's only Swift. What is it that Jamie says? There are no men like me. Alright, so that's good/bad. Alright, I've got another question. I've got a second question. This is a really important question. This is the sort of question that I can only answer with crowdsourcing the answer. I want you guys to identify this tune. Bum bum ba da da dum bum ba da da dum bum ba da 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 dum bum ba da da dum bum ba da da dum bum. What is that from? Does anyone know what that tune is from? It has been driving me crazy, man. It's from like an old commercial or something, I think. Maybe. I think something kind of old-timey, old school, like an old like variety show. Yeah, it does sound like cartoony. I don't think it is from Doctor Who, but it is a bit like that da 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 da, that sound that drives that guy crazy. What is that? What? Bum bum ba da da dum bum ba da da dum bum. Is it from something? Does that not remind anyone of something? It's I think it's like something that like lists come from. Yeah, I'll do it again. So bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum. I swear to God, it's from something. It's like a little it's like a repetitive little ditty that goes in like the background. I don't know what it's from. It's not the Game of Thrones theme. I don't think it's from the Addams. Is it the Addams Family? A lot of people are saying Addams Family. Other people are saying Family Guy. It's not the Family Guy main theme. I know that. Yeah, it does sound a bit like a game show. Oh, Charles Clayton found it. Charles Clayton says he found it. Where did you found it, Charles? All right, some people say it's not the Addams Family. All right. Look, I'm going to be honest, this is not the most thrilling kind of entertainment talking about this. So, look, tell you what, a lot of people saying Addams Family, I'm going to look up Addams Family, I'll see if it's the same. When this video gets uploaded into the main channel as a video itself, not a live stream, then we can figure this out in the comments. Because the problem with this live chat is that the comments aren't saved, so you can't go back and look at them later. So, alright, we'll come back when the video gets uploaded onto the main channel. We will work it out. We will get to the bottom of this mystery. We will sleuth the Blue's Clues, and we will get to the bottom of this. All right? It's going to be great. You'll seem to be enjoying this, though. We could just play a game where I just do a boop-de-boop songs, just some tune in my brain box, and y'all can try and like recognize it, and we can work out if it's a famous song or if I just made it up. That would be exciting, wouldn't it? And then we can give points. We can give little Swifty points to whoever gets the most. That'd be exciting. And apparently there's a Facebook group now. I suppose I should go and have a look at that. We do need some kind of little space, don't we? Some kind of like forum, some kind of place to have a little Swifty group. I don't know if Facebook's the best place for it, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of Facebook as a platform. But yeah, we'll work something out. We can do the Facebook group for now. But yeah, link the things in the comments of the video that's going to be uploaded soon. And identify this tune. We're gonna fade out with this tune one more time. All right. From the top. Bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum. Alright, this has been a pleasure. Thank you all for tuning into this dumb show. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you in the comments of the video when it uploads. It is indeed the Boopy Boop by the Boopy Boobs. Thank you, and good night. Cheers.